Good morning. So, as Eric said, my name is Martina Gollin Graves. I'm the president and CEO of Mental Health America of Wisconsin. We're a statewide organization that has spent many years in this space talking about workplace mental health. But overall, our mission is really focused on advocacy, education, and service. We support more than half the counties in the state in a variety of different ways, but mainly around suicide prevention, around technical assistance, and training. So I'm really pleased that Eric invited myself and my organization to spend some time talking about a topic that really just seems to keep rising to the top. Whenever I am amongst colleagues, friends, family, it always seems to lean towards how do we support people in their natural elements, whether that be work, whether that be school, and that just really seems to be a rising issue in conversation. So my role this morning is to really kind of frame the issue around workplace mental health. So I'm going to ask our tech guy in the back to bring up our first slide. Oh, maybe. So I'll get started. So really talking about the state of workplace mental health in our country, but also in the state of Wisconsin. And really, they are simultaneous, the numbers and the stats. So first of all, my guess as an employer, you care about mental health. You care about your employees. You want them to succeed. You want them to thrive. As an employer, my guess is, depending on your role, you care about the bottom line. I'm an employer. I get that. You need to control costs as well as being concerned about productivity. Promoting employee mental health. Just stay on the first one for now. Thanks. Yep. Promoting employee mental health, it allows you to achieve both, right? So your bottom line, cost, productivity. I know you are concerned about the rising mental health and substance abuse issues in your companies. I've spoken to Eric, and that's how this morning's topic even came about, because your companies reached out saying, we want to know more, we want to learn more. I guess, the question becomes, what do I do? What's the best approach? And so my colleagues that'll come after me will take a deeper dive and talk about more practical applications. But let's just talk a little bit about what's happening in our country and why this is important. So I'm sure I don't have to tell you, the American workplace, the Wisconsin workplace, was completely unprepared for COVID-19. It's unprecedented, unlike anything we've ever seen. In 2020, workers were more stressed than ever, no surprise. They were more worried about their physical health and their mental health. They were more anxious about their financial issues and more concerned about their employer and worried that their supervisors may be unsympathetic about the stresses and stressors that they were feeling. But today, I want us to think about that there are approaches and that there is hope, and that as an employer, you can make changes and contribute to the wellness of your employees. Next slide, please. So, why does promoting mental health make sense? First of all, mental health conditions exact a major toll from our workforce each and every year. In any given year, over 25% of Americans are affected by anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. What's more is that those conditions strike during our most productive years, our most productive working years. So think about from the time we're 16 to when we retire. But in that 25 to 45 age range is when we see the highest rates of mental illness, or that it emerges in our early 20s, and then oftentimes we don't get treatment until about 10 years later. In fact, research shows that mental health conditions cause greater disability, listen to this, greater disability than cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and arthritis. I saw some eyebrows go up. So, that is why workplace health promotion programs are really, really important. So on an average, employers like yourselves can save $5, almost $6 per dollar spent. So think of all the high cost premiums and services that people use through their insurance. You can save money. In fact, IBM saved $500,000 in outpatient costs in 1 year when they integrated its behavioral health, their pharmacy, disability, and other related services. There are ways when you think about prevention instead of reacting to the situation on the back end. There are ways to prevent and decrease costs. Next slide, please. So, I'm an affiliate of a national organization. MHA, Mental Health America, is a national organization. There's about 200 of us across the country. Last year, every year actually, we do a Mind the Workplace survey. And so this report is reflective of 2020. And I thought it was really a great way for us to frame the conversation today so you understand what other employers like yourselves across sectors have been experiencing in terms of workplace mental health and stress. So in partnership with our national organization, the Work Health Survey launched in February of 2020, and it was available to the public through all of the MHA websites, our online screening process. The survey included 16 questions as measures for financial insecurity, burnout, supervisor support, workplace stress, and mental illness, so people who live with mental illness and identify having a mental health condition in the workplace. And it collected over 5,000 surveys over a 7-month period. Next slide, please. So let's take a closer look. So that first column are the measures that we looked at. And so in 2020, energy, nonprofit, social services, and education employers ranked as the healthiest industries. Consistent with our 2018 survey and findings, food and beverage, retail, manufacturing, and automotive ranked as the unhealthiest. And this was consistent in 2018 and again in 2020. And they were the unhealthiest across all 5 measures. These same industries were also likely to be impacted the most by the pandemic. Especially employers with fewer than 50 employees. And the company size, I'm sure, it's no surprise to you, the company size impacted how employees perceived their workplace. So companies with 1,000 to 5,000 employees had the healthiest mental health score. Companies from about 251 employees to 1,000 employees had the healthiest supervisor support score. And companies with 50 employees or fewer had the unhealthiest scores, average scores for supervisor support and mental health. So I'm going to take a moment and pause. Any thoughts about that? You didn't know you were going to have to interact this morning. Yes? He said a question of resources sometimes for smaller employers. Yeah. Sometimes smaller employers don't have EAP programs in the same way that a larger organization may not have partnerships with community-based resources as well. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yep. She said, as a smaller employer, she's sometimes just too busy to deal with it. And I am an employer of less than 50, and I am Mental Health America, and we really struggle in that area because as a smaller employer, everyone's wearing lots of different hats. So absolutely, that is a struggle and a challenge, yes. Any other thoughts? All right. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a look at the areas. I'm not going to look at all of the measures, but the ones that kind of rose to the top and had the largest variance between people's responses. So the work environment. Work environments have drastically changed over the past year, including the addition of PPE, protective equipment, and physical distancing, right? We can all relate to that. In workplace settings or shifts to remote workplace environments. How many of you in here either work remotely or have employees that work remotely right now? Oh, okay, almost all of you, at least half of you. Some employees may have lost childcare services, or in fact, they're homeschooling. Homeschooling and working side by side. So, right, they're on a Zoom call and they have little ones or kiddos sitting at the kitchen table and they're trying to balance that. Or they're sharing workspaces with their spouses, partners, or parents, right? We're the gamut, across the entire gamut. Remote work environments may be ill-equipped for an employee to carry out their job's responsibilities, like lack of appropriate technology, home office equipment, or access to reliable internet. So these two charts show you how that the majority of people are feeling very distracted and they're finding it difficult to concentrate. I'm sure that's probably no surprise, but this is a survey that talked to more than 5,000 people across the United States, and whatever you thought, they're confirming it for you. And then my employer provides a safe and welcoming environment for employees who live with mental illness. And so this is an area that Mental Health America of Wisconsin has spent a lot of time over the years supporting employers around, is creating tools and safe spaces and trainings so that employers can increase the likelihood of people who live with a mental illness to feel supported, and that employers, supervisors, and managers have the tools to make that happen in a meaningful and intentional, safe way. And an employer providing a safe and welcoming environment for employees who live with a mental illness and was most strongly correlated with the healthiest overall workplaces. Hopefully that's no surprise to anyone. Meaning social service companies don't always get this right either. And so I think that's just an ongoing challenge for all of us, whether it is a larger company or a smaller company that focuses on healthcare and social service. Next slide, please. Workplace stress. So supervisors, what we found when from the results was that supervisors providing emotional support was strongly correlated with the employer providing a safe and welcoming environment for employees living with a mental illness. Any thoughts about why that correlation makes sense? It makes sense in my mind, but I'm curious if you have questions about that. Okay, makes sense to folks. Of employees who strongly disagreed that their supervisors provide emotional support, over 85% disagreed, or somewhat disagreed, that their employers provide a safe and welcoming environment for employees who live with mental illness. So interestingly, the bottom line was that how valued an employee feels remains a higher priority than having a higher salary after a living wage. Does that surprise anyone? Just by a show of hands, does that last comment? The fact that employees feeling valued by their employer remains a higher priority than their wage. Okay, yeah. Next slide, please. Employee burnout. So the two areas that I pulled out where I feel emotionally drained from my work or I spend time looking for a new position. So studies on mental health, the effects of COVID on mental health in the workplace have primarily targeted healthcare professionals, right? We hear a lot about healthcare professionals, and rightly so. But a recent study, which doctors and nurses experienced high levels of burnout due to the pandemic. However, employees do not need to work in high-stress environments to experience burnout. And so I think we often equate healthcare workers and other essential workers that might work in very high-stressed environments, that's where the focus should be, and it makes perfect sense to all of us that they would experience high rates of burnout. But what our results showed us was that other workers who may not work in high-stress environments were experiencing similar rates of burnout. And our findings reinforce that burnout is a threat to employee mental health across company size, industry, and organizational rank. We asked employees who completed the survey if they were experiencing common signs of burnout through the following measures. And this is what they were saying, through the measures of, I feel emotionally drained from my work, I have accomplished many worthwhile things in my job, I really don't care what happens to my colleagues or clients at my job, I feel more callous toward people since I took this job. And so people are feeling tremendously drained, and they were responding to a whole host of questions, which I was just sharing. Any thoughts, questions? Makes sense, right? I think we can all relate to this, but I think the takeaway is that as you think about your own companies, your own employees, that sometimes our perception as employers about what's stressful and what isn't really isn't a good indicator of if people are feeling that overwhelming sense of stress and burnout. And we really have to create opportunities to allow people to talk about this and share a little bit about what their experience is, in spite of what we think it should be. And I think that's sometimes a challenge for us when we're small employers wearing lots of hats and really just trying to grind it out, right? It's like, it needs to get done. So it goes back to my very first comment about we all care, but keeping costs low, but also productivity. And so how do we balance that with caring about people's wellness? Excuse me. Next slide, please. So one of the other areas that we looked at in the survey was financial insecurity. According to our online screening program, 1 in 4 people who screened moderate to severe for anxiety and depression in August of 2020 cited financial problems as one of the primary factors contributing to their mental health problems right at that time. Our research explores the relationship between financial insecurity and its impact on mental health in the age of COVID-19. And so I think sometimes as employers, we get very caught up in that we're really happy that we're still able to provide people with employment, right? And on some level, maybe people should be grateful. And what we're learning is that, yep, some people are still employed and they're happily employed, but there's a large group of folks that are still worried, and that's something that as employers, again, making space to talk about this. It doesn't always, sometimes, the old adage, if we bring it up, it's, opening Pandora's box, and what do we do about that? And I think that there's opportunities that we miss to have those richer conversations as especially on the supervisor and manager level, to be able to support people in where they're struggling in the moment, right? But we don't know if we don't ask. And so it doesn't mean that we have to have an answer to fix it. It just means that we want to create opportunities for people to share what their stressors are. And that maybe it's an opportunity to say, nope, I have spoken to management, or if you are management, or if you are the leadership, and this is our plan for the next 12 to 24 months. And things are very secure and stable right now. But if there aren't opportunities to have that conversation, people are creating God only knows what scenarios in their mind. So survey respondents were asked if they were experiencing financial insecurity through a host of measures that I won't go through. But here's a couple that kind of highlighted what I thought were probably something you might want to know more and had the largest variance. So I am paid enough to save 3 months worth of expenses for an emergency. The majority, I can't read, my screen is so little, is that about 60% disagreed. I'm able to afford my or my family's health care costs. Again, that's about 66%. I'm so sorry, I can't read the numbers from here. And so those were the two areas around financial insecurity that rose to the top, that people were really worried. Like, if I lost my job, currently I'm not able to save at least 3 months worth of wages in preparation. And they're also worried about, of course, I think many of us in this room, rising healthcare costs, right? And so every year, many of us as employers have to share with our employees that maybe their premium is increasing. And so you can only imagine, as I'm sharing what people are telling us, employees are telling us, are creating to their stress. I don't know about you, but I usually have that conversation in November with my employees. I see someone smiling, in preparation for the new year for healthcare. And I have to brace myself, to share that with my employees, that healthcare costs, your portion, might be raised 1 or 2% or whatever it might be. So can you imagine during this time of uncertainty, how having those conversations that maybe you've had with people for many, many years, year after year, it's even worse. It's even worse right now. Okay, next slide, please. So I don't want to be the bearer of all bad news, right? So I wanted to give you a sense of what employees are worried about, what they're thinking about, as a way to get you to think about what it is that's within your control, that you can support and talk about and create spaces. I also wanted to share a tool, right? So when you're talking to people and they're really expressing worry and stress, that there are supports. And so that sometimes, you're not quite sure, and I think Eric mentioned this, what is my role and what is appropriate in my role? And I think being able to send people to resources that don't require them to necessarily leave their home, don't require them extra money, as a way for them to maybe be thinking about their wellness, engaging their wellness is invaluable. And our online screening, which is a national tool, but here in Wisconsin, our website, Mental Health America of Wisconsin, when people take the online survey to gauge if they need more, like they're saying, I've been really feeling more anxious than normal, or gosh, I'm really struggling with my mood and depression, or I have a loved one, they can take a private, personal online screening. And what's nice about using the one that's connected to MHA Wisconsin, it lets them know what the results were. It's not pretending to be a clinician. It's saying, you scored really high in this area. You might want to seek out resources for X, Y, or Z. And it directs them directly to Wisconsin resources in their community. And so that's the nice piece, is that when people take the survey, it's not just sending them to some national and they have to try to, sift through a bunch of resources. So I highly recommend, if you're having conversations and you know that people in your place of employment are struggling in some of the areas that we just talked about, again, this is a fantastic tool. A screening is a tool that it's been proven by research to help identify symptoms, and that's really what that would be doing. Next slide, please. And again, it only takes a few minutes. So I just wanted to quickly share that these are the areas that the screening tool covers. So it reflects experiences of help-seeking population that access mental health screenings. So these are all of the areas that we have been able to provide support for people who are experiencing symptoms in one or more of these areas. Next slide, please. So, I have come to the end of my time. I did want to share that we are locally, our main office is local in Milwaukee, on the south side of Milwaukee. We have two outpatient clinics, one on 6th and Virginia, and one on the north side. We provide support to people virtually and on-site for AOTA and mental health services. But even more importantly, Monday through Friday, during regular business hours, someone answers our phone if people have questions, and sometimes people just call because they need support and need to talk to someone. And so the person who answers our phone is trained to support people who are either in crisis or not, just needing to know what is available to them. And I share that with you. Again, I want you to walk away with a couple of resources today saying, well, okay, that's great. Thanks for telling me what the nation looks like, but what do I do for real people in real time? And our organization, you can either check out the website, which has a ton of resources as employers. We have fact sheets that you can print off and share, so they're informational from A to Z. Whether it's actual diagnoses or information for family members, as well as calling and getting a real live person to maybe walk someone through a crisis or direct them to other resources if it doesn't make sense in-house for ourselves. So I'm going to stop there. Any questions that may have come up? Otherwise, I'm just going to hand the mic over to my colleague. All right. Oh, yes, sir. His question was, when I was talking about the burnout slide, or maybe any of them, stress slides, and saying Supervisor Conversations, what would that conversation look like? And I could share specifically, but I think every situation is very different. But what I will share, which I should have said, is, and I shared this with Eric, is that we actually have online training modules for exactly that question. And I am happy to share that resource. And so, I mean, I don't want to give a blanket answer because I think it ultimately starts with relationships, right? So if I don't have a good relationship and I sit down and ask you, but I think it's okay to say, hey, how are you doing today? I noticed that you just might seem like you're, not quite yourself today. Is there anything I can support you around, right? So do you remember when I talked about the healthiest organizations were the ones where they felt that they had supervisor support. And that looks very different. I don't know what your industries look like. I don't know how you're able to carve that out, right? It's more than just saying, hi, good morning, but maybe it's not. Maybe if you're in a manufacturing environment and you're walking the floor, maybe you don't walk the floor regularly and say hi and get to know people's names. So it really depends on your industry, but it is often about the relationship. So then when you say, I notice something's a little bit different, that makes sense because I see you every morning and you have a sense of who I am. I think sometimes people just want to know that they matter and that they're worthy. And when I say good morning to you, and I say hello, and I ask about you and your family and your weekend, and when things are a little off, that maybe creates a space for me to say, hey, you want to walk and get a cup of coffee? And then we start having a little bit deeper conversation. So there is a training, literally. It's the reason we did it with supervisors and managers in mind. It's to support supervisors and managers to have some of those challenging conversations, knowing that you are super busy. You don't have time to come to trainings like this every week for several weeks in a row. And so it covers areas about how to create a work place culture where you can have those conversations. And there's about 10 modules. They're anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes that you can pick and choose. Like today, I want to know how to have this conversation, or I want to have a difficult conversation. You get to pick that module, and it walks you through. It asks you some questions. It gives you some scenarios. It gives you some opportunity. It gives you some role play examples. So there is something out there that not just my organization, but we created it in partnership with other employers, large and small, throughout the state, to give input and to help fine-tune it so it made sense when we shared it with people like yourself. So I will let Eric know about how folks can access that resource. Yes, sir. There is a fee, and I will share that with Eric, and it really is based on company size, right? So company sizes have different budgets. And so, again, this is just wanting to be able to make sure people have access to this resource, but we don't want to create barriers for folks. So I think there's a strong correlation. In fact, there's been research that shows people who have moderate depression, that moderate exercise is often a way to manage depression and anxiety without medication. Now again, don't take that as the gospel because everyone's situation is different, but there has been research to show people living with moderate depression and anxiety can manage their symptomology with regular exercise. I think, so what happens is when we move and we exercise, and we're not talking about, a rigorous workout for an hour, we're talking about a nice, literally research is showing, 10-minute walk really does create an opportunity for you to get a surge of serotonin and dopamine into your brain and create those happy chemicals, get those happy chemicals flowing. But the other piece is too, I'm gonna say this and then I'm gonna get going, is that people who live with physical health issues have a higher rate of depression. And so that's just something to remember, that physical health, so employees that might be struggling with physical health issues often have comorbidity and have issues with mental health problems and challenges, I should say. And just think about that. If your lifestyle has been altered, or your mobility has been decreased, or your life has changed in some way because of your physical health, that is going to have a direct correlation and impact on your mental health. And so again, it's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Getting people engaged, getting people moving, whether it's just chair exercise, chair yoga, or that 10-minute walk is really important. But I always say that mental illness is not the casserole disease. And so oftentimes when, our coworkers have had a death in their family, or they know that someone in their family or the coworker is struggling with a physical health issue, people send cards and they reach out. And we just don't do that with mental illness or mental health challenges because we're not quite sure if it's okay or how to talk about that. And I consistently hear people say, gosh, it was so nice that you just asked me how I was, or stopped by, or just gave me a little card that said, thinking about you. It's those small things that allow people to know that they matter. Thank you.